They thought it would be a routine sweep. A backward world on the edge of nowhere, broadcasting outdated radio waves and nuclear signatures like it was still in its adolescence. Primitive. Divided. Loud. A perfect candidate for either uplift or extermination. That's how the Galactic Concord handled anomalies. They sent a cruiser, just one, as a courtesy. Standard intimidation. Orbit the planet, display superiority, issue terms. The cruiser vanished without a trace. Not a distress signal. Not even debris. Just silence. The fleet commander chuckled. Probably engine failure. Another vessel followed. It too disappeared. By the third dispatch, command began to worry. Not about resistance. Resistance was impossible. This was a species without FTL travel, without interstellar unity, without even a planetary government. No, what concerned them was the silence. Every Concord engagement created noise, screams, pleas, panic. But Earth returned only static. So they sent a battle group. 12 warships. Thousands of troops. Dozens of drones. They emerged from the jump gate, and never made it to orbit. By now, the Concord Council convened an emergency session. For the first time in 800 years, they admitted confusion. Probes launched near Earth revealed the wreckage of the initial fleets. But it wasn't scattered like after a battle. It was organized. Reforged. Welded into low-orbit satellites and kinetic defense platforms. Earth's orbital field had become a graveyard, ***, and a weapon ***. Alien alloy cannons fused with human ICBM systems. They hadn't just fought back. They'd adapted mid-invasion. A transmission was intercepted soon after. A human voice, calm but unwavering, speaking directly into Concord encryption layers. You came here to dominate. We came here to end that era. You brought a war to our cradle. Now we walk. The fleet scrambled. Mobilization orders were sent across half the galaxy. No one knew who authorized them. But panic spread. Not because of a declaration of war, but because of the implication: Earth was not responding. Earth was acting ***. And the Concord was reacting. The High Admiral stood before the council, voice shaking. He'd seen the raw footage leaked from one surviving drone. It showed a Concord troop drop-turn-massacre. Human soldiers with scavenged tech, moving through jungle and ruin like phantoms. Targeting command units first. Using their own weapons, sometimes without even understanding them fully. Just watching. Learning. Improvising. A tactic not seen in centuries. Humans didn't fight clean. They bled. They screamed. They kept moving. And they didn't stop. The Admiral spoke again. We expected submission. Instead, we found calculation. Vengeance. Unity. They turned every advantage into a trap. They used pain like it was fuel. Most Concord species were post-war civilizations. War was simulation, doctrine, theory. Humanity had never left the battlefield. They evolved in it. And now that battlefield had expanded. Further intelligence confirmed what no one believed: human nations had united in days. Former enemies now co-manufactured weapons. Earth had no central authority, but it had rage. That was enough. The kind of rage that didn't burn out. It strategized. It remembered. It planned. A Concord psychological analyst broke rank, published a classified memo. She said, "Humans are not violent because they're unstable. They're violent because they're engineered to survive absolute collapse. We've triggered the worst possible version of them. Not a species desperate to win, a species that refuses to lose." Diplomatic envoys were proposed. But no channels remained open. Earth jammed communications across half the local cluster. Not with interference, but with messages. Stories. Declarations. Warnings. Not one asked for peace. All demanded acknowledgement. One read, "You assumed our silence meant fear. It was calculation. You assumed our divisions meant weakness. It was preparation. You assumed we were alone. We were simply waiting. Fleet morale collapsed. Several captains refused to engage further. One resigned mid-jump. A Concord world issued an open surrender to Earth. Earth hadn't even contacted them. And then came the image. A panoramic shot leaked across the networks. Human children helping construct an orbital cannon using parts from 3 destroyed Concord ships. Smiling. Proud. Already calling it ours. Not even war-weary. Just getting started. The Concord Council met one final time before blackout protocol. The speaker, pale, breathless, offered only one sentence to the record. We woke something ancient in them. Not technology. Not ambition. But memory. Memory of every invasion, every war, every loss. They carried their ghosts like armor. And then, nothing. The humans didn't invade. They didn't press forward. They just watched. Like hunters waiting for the next mistake. In the end, the galaxy didn't fear what humans did. It feared what they were willing to become. Not monsters. Not conquerors. But something worse, survivors with no quit left in their bones. Creatures who, when faced with extinction, redefined what survival meant. They weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting to ensure that no species would ever make the mistake of targeting Earth again. And they were terrifyingly good at it. And so began the age of quiet terror, where every decision was measured against a single, unspoken question. Will this awaken the humans again? Because the galaxy learned something too late. You don't poke a sleeping apex predator. And you never, ever give humanity a reason to stand united. Not unless you're ready to meet the storm. They didn't evolve in safety. There were no nutrient oceans, no perfect climates, no harmony with nature. Earth was a world of violence, starvation, and chaos. Their history wasn't a progression of enlightenment, it was a brutal, unending trial by fire. Where other species grew in balance with ecosystems, humans tore theirs apart and rebuilt them. Every advancement they made came at a cost of blood. They didn't rise despite their violence, they rose because of it. Where most species had a predator or two to outsmart, humans were born surrounded by apex threats. Massive carnivores. Toxic plants. Ice ages. Droughts. Volcanic winters. Disease. Death stalked them from every direction. Their survival wasn't guaranteed, it was earned, every generation, with pain and loss. Adaptability wasn't a trait. It was their only option. They became masters of improvisation, not because they wanted to, but because their environment punished hesitation with extinction. Their biology terrifies the Council for good reason. No other species has a stress response that turns them into killing machines. Their adrenal surge boosts speed, pain tolerance, reflexes, temporarily transforming them into berserkers. Even their pupils dilate to detect threat better. Their muscles, though inefficient in rest, explode under pressure. They don't just react, they evolve moment to moment in combat. Worse still, they heal. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But faster than they should. Their immune systems are unnecessarily aggressive, built to survive pathogens that no longer exist. Scars are permanent, yes, but they wear them like medals. Each one a lesson, each one a memory. Their minds are even more dangerous. They don't think linearly. Under stress, they leap to irrational conclusions, yet terrifyingly these leaps often work. They weaponize instinct. In battle, they don't just follow orders, they innovate, sabotage, improvise. They've been observed modifying weapons during firefights, crafting traps from battlefield debris, and using enemy equipment with no training. It isn't genius. It's desperation forged into intelligence. Emotionally, they are chaos incarnate. Unstable? Yes. But with purpose. They mourn later. They rage first. Entire civilizations have been wiped from history by humans operating in grief. Revenge is not an impulse, it's a strategy. Their pain doesn't paralyze them, it drives them. They've never seen war as something to avoid. They see it as an inevitable part of survival. And they've mastered it accordingly. They developed nuclear weapons before unified government. They detonated them on their own species. Not as a test. As a message. Then, instead of extinction, they created diplomacy around annihilation. Mutually assured destruction wasn't a deterrent, it was their idea of balance. That was their idea of peace. Their history is a cycle of rebuilding from ash. Civilizations rose, fell, burned, and rose again. Each one stronger. Meaner. Smarter. Every time they crawled out of their own wreckage, they brought new tools to the next war. Every era was an arms race, even with themselves. And through it all, they never stopped moving forward. Where other species evolved to avoid pain, humans learned to weaponize it. They train in discomfort. Seek hardship voluntarily. Climb mountains with no reason, dive into oceans without gills, starve themselves to learn control. They simulate death so they can handle it when it arrives. They fight not because they must, but because they want to know if they can. That mentality isn't cultural, it's biological. Their dopamine response rewards risk. No other species celebrates its worst. They do. They write songs about defeat, make movies about their failures, turn massacres into holidays. They remember every scar. They teach their children how their ancestors bled and survived. Loss doesn't define them. Survival does. And what truly breaks logic is that they don't even consider themselves strong. They see themselves as flawed, fragile, broken. That delusion is their most terrifying trait. Because a species that sees its unmatched resilience as weakness will never stop trying to get stronger. They fight like they're already dying. They plan like they're already lost. That desperation turns every battle into a last stand. Other species rely on protocol, tradition, rank. Humans rely on instinct, timing, gut feeling. Their war doctrine has no central design, it's a chaos net. Independent actors forming dynamic clusters of destruction. Command structures exist, but in crisis, they disappear. One soldier can turn the tide not because of command, but because humans believe in myth. They follow symbols, not just orders. Give them a name, a face, a story, and they'll march into death if it means making that myth real. Their ethics are flexible, brutal, and effective. Mercy is a tool. So is terror. They understand fear better than anyone because they lived in it for centuries. They use it now. Not with cruelty, but with precision. If they show mercy, it's calculated. If they show brutality, it's surgical. And sometimes, they do both in the same breath. Their adaptability extends beyond the battlefield. They absorb technology like a black hole. Give them a broken weapon, and by the next day it's mass-produced. They reverse engineer foreign tech in weeks. When they took Concorde energy rifles, they didn't just copy them, they improved them. Lighter, more efficient, modular. Build not for form, but for use. They do not worship tools. They use them until they break, then they make them better. Even their environment breeds warriors. Earth isn't just violent in history, it's violent now. Hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, wildfires. Every continent carries death. And yet they build homes on fault lines. They don't avoid disaster, they outlast it. And now, they've seen the galaxy. The real fear isn't that they want to conquer it. It's that they don't. Because if humans ever decide to take something, nothing will stop them. Not because of superior numbers or firepower. But because they'll make it happen, no matter the cost. They fight with a conviction most species don't understand. An unshakable belief that even in death, they matter. You can kill 1, 10, 1,000. But somewhere, one survives. And that one will remember. That one will tell the others. And the next time, they'll come prepared. That's why they are terrifying. Not because they enjoy war. But because they were made for it, and they haven't even begun to show the galaxy what that truly means. The moment humanity vanished from sensors, the Concorde believed they had fled. Tactical withdrawal, maybe even surrender. But they didn't understand what humans were doing. They weren't hiding, they were preparing. No demands were made, no diplomats dispatched. Only silence, the kind that always precedes something irreversible. When the first wave of Concord forces jumped into the Sol system, they found nothing where resistance was expected. Cities offline. Satellites dead. Orbit quiet. They moved in. And that's when everything collapsed. It began with the loss of logistics. Fleet supply chains across multiple systems failed simultaneously. Replenishment convoys went missing. Refueling stations reported system-wide meltdowns, then went dark. Communications between sectors dropped off, replaced by scrambled data loops and old Earth songs distorted into static. Engineers traced the disruption to corrupted Concord protocols, hacked and rewritten in patterns so primitive they weren't even classified as threats. Human-made code embedded into basic maintenance systems. The virus hadn't just shut down their support structure. It had rewired it. The second wave landed on human colonies expecting resistance. Instead, they found empty cities. Infrastructure intact, buildings untouched, but no humans. Then the traps triggered. Improvised explosives and streetlights, repurposed mining equipment rigged for kinetic burst. Surveillance drones hijacked and turned into shrapnel bombs. One Concord captain described it as walking through a museum designed to kill you at every corner. Even the furniture was weaponized. Then came the strikes. Not massive fleet engagements. Precision hits. Small units surgically efficient. Human operatives deploying stolen Concord gear with disturbing familiarity. They didn't follow battle lines. They appeared behind enemy lines, inside secured facilities, even aboard dreadnoughts. One ship was destroyed from within after a human boarding team disabled the AI core and vented command decks mid-jump. No survivors. No trace. Only a message left in the ship's black box. You shouldn't have come. The Concord had trained for large-scale warfare. Strategic engagements. Territory. Control. But humanity didn't play that game. They fought with chaos. No central command. No unified fleet. Just scattered cells acting independently, each one a hammer, each one aimed with purpose. By the time the Concord responded to one strike, 3 more had already been executed elsewhere. Their predictive systems failed. Models couldn't account for humans fighting like they were already dead. Human adaptability became nightmare fuel. Concord weapons turned against their own creators. Drones reprogrammed mid-battle. Tactics shifted hour to hour. Human soldiers altered strategy mid-engagement, taking absurd risks that consistently paid off. One report mentioned a single squad disabling a forward base by breaching a fusion core with nothing but mining gear and thermal paste. No survivors. No bodies found. Entire Concord worlds began defecting out of fear. Some tried to declare neutrality. Others surrendered without a single human setting foot on their soil. Not from diplomacy. From rumor. From intercepted transmissions of other worlds being dismantled by enemies they couldn't even see. The word phantoms began circulating among Concord troops. A myth to explain how soldiers died in their sleep, how bases disappeared, how no one ever saw the enemy coming. And it wasn't just soldiers breaking. Commanders. Strategists. Admirals. All reported rising psychological degradation. They couldn't plan. Couldn't predict. Couldn't sleep. Because humans didn't follow logic. They followed instinct. Rage. Spite. They didn't aim to win battles. They aimed to shatter morale. Broadcasts appeared on Concord networks, human faces speaking in perfect alien dialects. Some offered peace. Others offered warnings. One, in particular, went viral across the stars. A woman's face, calm, scarred, speaking directly into Concord command feeds. We don't want your empire. We want it gone. We don't want your surrender. We want your silence. We warned you once. This is your answer. By the 3rd week, Concord casualty reports reached numbers not seen in recorded galactic history. But the most terrifying statistic wasn't deaths. It was the speed. No war in the Council's archive had moved this fast. Humanity wasn't just fighting, they were accelerating the war. In one system, a Concord flotilla arrived to secure a strategic relay hub. They found a single human vessel waiting. Not a battleship. A cargo freighter retrofitted with Concorde weaponry. It disabled 2 destroyers before detonating itself inside the flagship's hangar. The explosion crippled the entire command chain. Survivors reported laughter echoing from the freighter's comms before the detonation. No demands. Just execution. Human tactics redefined brutality. Not for cruelty's sake, but for efficiency. They didn't waste effort. Didn't posture. They broke bones quickly and moved on. Every action was calculated to inflict maximum strategic collapse with minimum resource expenditure. And they succeeded. Not because they outnumbered the Concorde, but because they outmaneuvered them psychologically. Even their dead made an impact. Fallen human soldiers left beacons, data caches, sometimes booby traps using their own bodies. Messages etched into walls. For every one you take, 10 rise. It wasn't bravado. It was doctrine. Martyrdom weaponized. Entire Concorde units began disobeying orders. Retreating. Hiding. Suicide rates in the officer class spiked. Captains refused to engage human targets unless directly ordered. Others faked losses just to avoid contact. The Council issued morale protocols, speeches, incentives. None of it worked. Because deep down, everyone had realized the same truth: the humans weren't trying to win territory. They were trying to teach a lesson. And the galaxy was failing the test. Then came the sabotage of the Concorde Archive Core, thought untouchable, hidden on a vault world surrounded by defense grids. It went offline for 6 minutes. When it came back, over 2,000 years of data had been copied. Not deleted. Not corrupted. Stolen. And left behind, a single transmission. Now we know you better than you know yourselves. That was the moment the Council knew it had already lost. The war wasn't in space anymore. It was in the mind. The humans had taken the initiative, turned it into a weapon, and buried it in the heart of every Concorde species. They didn't need an armada. They had fear. Cold, engineered, intentional fear. And worst of all, the humans hadn't even committed their full strength yet. These were scouts. Survivors. Volunteers. Veterans of old wars, fighting not for conquest, but because someone had tried to break them again. And the Concorde had given them a reason to remember who they used to be. No one knew what would come next. A ceasefire? An invasion? A demand? But one thing was certain. The humans weren't going to stop until the Concorde understood one fundamental truth: the age of safe wars was over. And the galaxy would never again forget what it meant to awaken a human response. The moment the Council signed off on the emergency protocols, it was already too late. The humans hadn't just crippled their fleets or colonies. They'd broken something deeper: trust. Between species. Between governments. Between commanders and their own soldiers. The war was no longer fought with weapons. It had become a collapse of belief. And humanity didn't need to fire another shot to keep the dominoes falling. Senators whispered of infiltrators. Generals saw betrayal in every order. Entire sectors began pulling resources back, not to resist humans, but to defend themselves from allies. Concorde unity unraveled. And while chaos bloomed, Earth said nothing. There were no demands. No diplomats. No ultimatums. Just silence. And in that silence, paranoia flourished. The fear was engineered. Humans didn't just break systems, they replaced them with uncertainty. Reports came in of assassinations carried out in Capitol domes with no trace. Others spoke of entire war councils collapsing after a single intercepted broadcast. Some believed the humans had infiltrated Concorde minds. Others believed worse, that the humans weren't even trying anymore, and things were still falling apart. In reality, humanity hadn't sent fleets into the hard worlds. They didn't have to. All they needed were seeds. A few operatives. A few lies. A few truths made louder. They dropped information the Concorde tried to bury: corruption, oppression, mass manipulation, then simply watched the fire spread. Propaganda wasn't just a tool. It was a scalpel. Cut deep enough, and entire societies bled out without war. A dozen Concord races unilaterally declared non-aggression pacts with Earth. Others followed, offering reparations. Earth responded with one sentence: "We do not require your promises. Just your silence." There was no glory in surrender. No absolution. Only a cold acknowledgement of reality. The humans hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to end something. The Concord elite tried to fight back with public displays of strength. Mass rallies. Broadcasts. Ceremonial executions of human sympathizers. But every broadcast had interference. Somewhere in the signal, human voices emerged. Calm. Focused. Measured. "This isn't the end. This is the correction." One speech interrupted a live feed in 22 systems with the same message. "We do not demand obedience. We demand change. Or absence." Military forces began deserting. Not from fear of the humans, but from the realization that their leaders had no plan. Orders conflicted. Maps were outdated. Protocols failed. And above it all, the enemy was invisible. There were no front lines. Only shadows. And rumors that if you heard a human's voice before the strike, it meant you had been allowed to live. The council collapsed from the inside. Representatives stopped attending sessions. Security details grew larger than the senates they protected. Emergency powers were granted, revoked, reinstated. No one agreed who was in charge anymore. Every system turned inward. Every military vessel reclassified its own fleet as independent. The Concord hadn't lost to superior firepower. It had ceased to exist as a functional structure. When the Treaty of Seoul was drafted, it wasn't signed at gunpoint. There was no army in orbit. No blockade. It was sent on a drone. Unarmed. Simple language. It didn't demand surrender. It demanded restructuring. The Concord would disband. All member species would self-govern under their own laws. No forced assimilation. No military alliances. No cultural homogenization. And no authority beyond their borders. The final clause read, "Any species, council, or coalition that seeks to impose control over another shall answer not to humanity, but to consequence." It was not a threat. It was a law, written not in code, but in legacy. The galaxy had changed. And the humans had made sure it wouldn't forget why. The shocking part wasn't the treaty. It was how quickly everyone complied. Within weeks, Concord flags were burned, archives dismantled, command centers emptied. Concord officers vanished from public life. Entire databases were deleted. Not to hide failure, but to prevent the name from ever rising again. Humanity didn't ask them to erase it. They did it themselves. Out of shame. Out of fear. And through it all, Earth remained silent. No parade. No declaration. Just observation. They didn't move to fill the power vacuum. They didn't demand territory or tribute. They simply watched. And that unsettled the galaxy more than any invasion would have. Because it meant humans hadn't fought for gain. They fought to prove a point. And once it was made, they didn't care what came next, so long as it didn't threaten them again. The Council sent an envoy to Earth months later. A peace offering. The envoy was received, offered shelter, food, and quiet company. No discussion of war. No mention of the past. When he finally asked why Earth had stopped the war, the human diplomat answered without emotion. "We didn't stop it. We finished it." Galactic laws shifted. Not officially. Not by statute. But by memory. No species dared to build fleets at pre-war scale. No one imposed policies on lesser races. No one enforced cultural reform beyond their own borders. And whenever discussion of dominance returned, someone always asked the same quiet question. What if the humans are listening? The galaxy didn't rebuild around peace. It rebuilt around avoidance. Around restraint. Around balance. Not from empathy, but from a very specific kind of fear. Not of destruction, but of awakening that destruction again. No one wanted to be the one responsible for lighting that match. The name, Earth, stopped appearing on maps. Not because it was hidden. Because no one dared reference it improperly. The humans never asked for reverence. They didn't need to. The silence they left behind was louder than any victory song. And that silence changed everything. Years passed. Tensions cooled. Some even forgot. But those who remembered understood what the Concord had never grasped. Humans didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They just needed to show it that conquest came with a cost no empire could afford. A cost measured not in warships, but in certainty. The certainty that if the humans returned in force, nothing would be left standing. So they kept the peace. Not because they wanted to, but because they knew peace was the only thing keeping the storm from returning. History now teaches their name with a cautionary tone. Not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as the final example of what happens when you misjudge the quiet ones. The war ended, but it didn't fade. Its memory was etched into the very laws that replaced the Concord. Every treaty, every negotiation, every border drawn in this new galactic era is shadowed by one unspoken truth: don't provoke humanity. Not again. The galaxy doesn't see them often now. Their fleets are docked, not patrolling. Their ambassadors are former soldiers, calm but never soft. Their colonies are closed off, self-sufficient, uninterested in expansion. And yet, their influence stretches farther than any empire before them. Not by force. By memory. They don't need to be everywhere. Their absence speaks louder than any presence. One glimpse of a human ship in orbit turns negotiations silent. One mention of their name ends disputes. The younger species don't understand the fear. To them, Earth is just a world shrouded in myth. But the older ones know. They remember the way human operatives dismantled entire regimes with silence. How they ended a 1,000-year empire without declaring a single official war. And how, once the dust settled, they asked for nothing. No tribute. No territory. Just space. And distance. No one really knows what Earth looks like now. The few who visit are chosen, invited, and always return changed. They speak of a planet that has rebuilt not in arrogance, but in focus. Cities fortified, but not for show. Technologies that surpass the Concord's best, but remain hidden beneath humility. The humans don't broadcast progress. They don't flaunt power. They don't need to. What unsettles observers isn't their strength. It's their control. Total restraint. As if they've chosen to hold back every capability. Not because they lack the will to use them, but because they no longer want to be provoked into proving it again. And that restraint is what terrifies more than anything else. Because only a species that has nothing left to prove becomes immune to fear. Legends spread. A single human resolved a system-wide hostage crisis without firing a shot. Another mediated a 3-race border conflict simply by arriving. Entire pirate coalitions dissolve at the rumor of a human operative being in the sector. And yet, no official statements. No flags planted. No announcements made. The humans aren't protecting peace. They're maintaining distance. It's said that among them, war is still remembered, not erased. Children study it not as victory, but as warning. Their greatest fear is not being attacked again. It's being forced to respond. They've seen what they become in conflict, and they fear that part of themselves more than any alien species ever could. It's not humility, it's awareness. They are the monsters you created, refined, and awakened. And they chose to walk back into the dark, not because they were told to, but because they knew what would happen if they stayed in the light. There is a phrase now, used across systems when tensions rise. Don't make them get up. It doesn't refer to war. It refers to the humans. To the idea that somewhere they're watching. Not for conquest, but for necessity. If pushed, they will stand. And if they stand, the galaxy will kneel again, not because it was ordered to, but because it remembers what happened last time. Some species have tried to test the boundaries. Smugglers targeting human trade routes. Isolated skirmishes near their colonies. None return. No declarations. No retaliation claims. Just silence, followed by disappearance. It's not revenge. It's precision. Deterrence by erasure. Proof that Earth no longer plays politics, it plays consequences. And yet, for all the fear, there's a strange respect. Not admiration. Not affection. But a deep understanding that, without humanity, the galaxy would still be blind to its own arrogance. They didn't just destroy an empire. They ended an era, one built on control, assumption, and superiority. Now, the balance remains because everyone knows what happens when it breaks. Humanity never wanted to lead. But leadership was forced into their hands, and they carried it like a burden, not a crown. Now, they've laid it down, and warned the galaxy not to hand it back. They don't issue threats. They don't seek praise. Their message is always the same: we endured. We overcame. We survived your worst. Do not make us prove it again. And this is why the galaxy fears them. Not because of their weapons, but because of what they became without them. Because when pushed to extinction, they didn't fold, they transformed. Into something that fights without hesitation, builds without mercy, and remembers without forgiveness. And yet, after all of it, they chose silence over domination. That silence remains their legacy. Not the ruins of Concord. Not the burned worlds or collapsed fleets. But the stillness that followed. The cold understanding that if humanity ever decides the galaxy is a threat again, it won't be a war. It will be a warning shot no one survives. So they leave Earth alone. Not because they have to, but because the smartest civilizations understand one final truth: they survived everything. They buried their dead and kept walking. They carry pain like fuel. And they will never, ever go extinct quietly.